Welcome back to Season 12, Episode 13 of the Ubuntu podcast. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of July, and this week we're going to be rounding up the community news and events and some of our favourite news from the tech world. This week I am joined by Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'm glad to hear it, although no Alan this week.
No.
So I'm delighted to say we are being joined by Dr. Laura.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome back to the show, Laura. How are you?
Hiya. I'm good, thank you.
Now, at the top of these shows, we always have a little, what have we been up to? So, Laura, it's been like 2.5 years. What on earth have you been up to?
I finished my thesis.
So, what are you a doctor of?
I'm a doctor of philosophy, I think, technically, but it's a PhD. So I'm a doctor of environmental psychology.
Right, okay. And when did you finally finish your studies?
I got my certificate about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, so very, very recently then.
I actually submitted it back in January and I did my Viva, the oral exam, in March, I think. And it was all kind of signed off on Good Friday.
Wow. And how long were you working on that in total?
8.5 years.
8.5 years. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It's almost as old as my daughter.
Yeah, there's a podcast show, I think, where I probably announced that I was doing it. And
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Yeah, there almost certainly is a show where you announce that. We've got a back catalogue of 12 years, so you can definitely, go back and find that one.
Yep.
Oh, well, it's lovely to have you back. Thanks for standing in for Alan whilst he's off gallivanting somewhere or other. I believe he's at the Dance World Cup in Portugal.
Yes.
with no Wi-Fi.
Yeah, with no Wi-Fi, but chauffeuring and barbecuing for his daughter and her teammates. So, Mark.
Hello.
What have you been up to since last time we spoke?
I've been giving a few talks.
Have you? What have you been talking about and who have you been talking to?
Well, I was talking to the DevOps Oxford meetup about open source communities.
Right.
That's a talk I sort of wrote in a previous job several years ago about community theory and why we form communities and what communities are and all that jazz. And I gave another talk today to the Moodle General Developer Meeting about writing plugins for the Moodle mobile app.
Ah, right. You've mentioned this before.
Well, they've done something quite clever so Moodle is generally speaking a web application, but there's also a mobile app which can have plugins written for it, but you don't write plugins into the app, you write plugins into the web app, and then it uses web services to ask your server what plugins it has and then loads them into the app. It's quite a clever process.
Yeah, nifty stuff. Right then, shall we move on and get on with it?
Let's.
Right then, let's have a look at the community news. Mark, what did you find this week?
Well, we spoke a bit last time about Ubuntu's plans to drop 32-bit support from 1910 onwards, and it turns out that's not going to happen after all.
Oh.
No. Did you see anything of this, Laura?
I heard it on your podcast.
So I think we recorded the podcast within hours of the original announcement going out.
Yeah.
And since then, the internet burnt to the ground and firefighters have been out, put the fire out. Yes. So we originally announced, or Canonical originally announced, that we're going to entirely drop the 32-bit Intel archive from 1910 and onwards.
But wait, that's not what you meant.
And someone called Alan Pope stirred it up a little bit by doing some actual testing.
It all got very confused at one point.
I have to say, I am singularly unimpressed by the communication around this from all sorts of people.
Including this podcast?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, the initial announcement seemed straightforward enough, but then there was an announcement quote unquote from Valve, which was someone who works for Valve posting a tweet from an unverified account, which I don't think counts as an announcement from Valve, saying that they weren't going to support Ubuntu 19.10 onwards, when, as far as I can tell, they don't support non-LTS releases anyway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a response from Canonical, or someone from Canonical, saying, oh no, we didn't mean we're going to drop 32-bit support. We're just going to not update the 32-bit libraries from the version in 1804. And I went back and read the original announcement, and you could read the original announcement that way if that's what you were trying to understand from it, but literally nobody read it that way.
So I think also, I do agree there was definitely some confusion around the messaging there, although not around the original announcement. It was people's interpretation and follow-on. So, Pierre Lou, who works at Valve, who is one of the Linux engineers on their team there, is also one of the people who we spoke to. So we do know who he is, and, he has some very close involvement with, the Linux Steam client. So he had to say what he had to say. And then people were saying, somebody from Canonical then said this, but that actual quote comes from a comment in a forum discussion in an entirely unrelated, bit of discourse. So, people sharing these sort of snippets around unrelated, it was a bit of a mess. Now, the good news is, we realise it was a bit of a mess. We've had a chat. We've all agreed we'll do better next time.
We'll not do it again.
Yeah. So after, first of all, listening to all of the feedback that our community sent us via the many corners of the internet where you can hold these conversations, but mostly from the the Ubuntu discourse where most of the conversation was happening. There was certainly a lot of loud, shouty, angry responses, but amongst that there was some very insightful comments and some very useful feedback about the nature of some of the applications that were going to be impacted by this. And because we listened to our users and our community, we decided to take steps to come up with a more conservative approach here. So the plan is now we'll be supporting a subset of the 32-bit Intel packages in order to support these use cases where running 32-bit applications is still something that people want to do. And obviously games will benefit from that.
It does seem to be mainly proprietary applications which are relying on this going forwards.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Obviously games, I think, by and large, they're mostly proprietary. The non-proprietary ones you can compile and build in many cases, across all the architectures. And then printer drivers was another one. Printer drivers that you download from the vendor's website, for example, they tend to be 32-bit, even though they may not need to be. They tend to be for that architecture. And then there's some sort of really exotic stuff like applications for programming field programmable gate arrays and stuff like that. Anyway, it'll all be fine. 32-bit library support is remaining within the Ubuntu project for the foreseeable future.
Excellent.
And there was much rejoicing.
Laura, did you find any nice community news? Happy news, maybe?
Yeah, it's time for a new wallpaper competition.
Woo! Everyone loves a wallpaper competition.
I've been away for far too long because when I read that, I was just like walls wallpaper. Okay, so Eoan Ermine, is that how you pronounce it?
I think we've agreed the correct pronunciation of Eoan is 1910.
Okay. So 1910, which will be due out this October. There's a need for wallpaper, and there's now a competition, as has been happening in the past, for you to contribute your submissions.
So again, this conversation's being held on the Ubuntu discourse, and there's a rather nice little side benefit to this one, and that's that Will Cook, the manager of the desktop team, has said that he wants to put together a best of wallpapers collection that are present in the 2004 LTS, the next LTS. So there's some encouragement there for you to get your best drawings out, your best photographs of your clay sculptures, so that you can potentially get in as one of the winning entries for the 1910 competition, and then possibly become one of the best of selection for the 2004 LTS.
Cool. And these don't have to be Ermine related, do they? They're just nice wallpapers.
Yeah, they can be, anything from photographs of, a painting, a drawing, an illustration, 3D, abstract art, anything you like. The community will vote for them in the forum, and we'll have a link in the show notes for where you can submit your artwork and where you can also vote for your favourites.
Cool.
Now, we haven't done this segment for a while, but in Mir is Not Dead news, I'm pleased to announce the release of Mir 1.30, which is hot off the presses. It's literally hours old as we record this podcast. And really, I wanted to highlight this because people still, that whole 32-bit story, there was a lot of commentary there about, projects at Ubuntu that have faded away in the past, and I kept on seeing Mir being mentioned, so I feel it's appropriate we just remind everybody, Mir is not dead. And in fact, this release has got a focus on Wayland and supporting Wayland extension protocols.
What's that then?
I'm glad you asked.
This is a good question. I can't really articulate what that is very clearly, but the benefit from my point of view is that these extensions to the Wayland protocol are what enable the more exotic, old school desktop environments to be ported to Wayland. So in addition to this release, I'm also pleased to say that one of the Mir developers has provided some pull requests to the Mate desktop project that takes advantage of all of this stuff to further improve the emerging Wayland support in the Mate desktop. But one of my favourite features I saw in this release is that the Mir AL, which can be used as like a window manager, pseudo window manager, now supports Control-Alt-T.
Oh, to open a terminal.
And frankly, that's the only feature it needs to support, in my opinion. I think that's brilliant.
It's such a good desktop environment that you only need to use the terminal.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're interested in having a play, tarballs for the source and PPAs for the assorted Ubuntu releases are available for you to go and experiment. Mark, what else has been going on in the community?
Well, Ubuntu has started work on a new desktop Snap store.
Have they really?
Apparently so.
What's wrong with the current one?
I'm not entirely clear on that. But so the current way of getting snaps graphically on the desktop is using a plugin for GNOME software, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So GNOME software is extensible.
Yes.
And Flatpak support and Snap support are both implemented as plugins through its plugin architecture.
All good so far?
Yeah, and that works well enough. However, as we develop new features in the Snap store, it's becoming increasingly difficult to backport those patches to older releases of GNOME software.
Aha.
And also we want to try and keep the design of the web version of the Snap store and the desktop store in sync with one another. And that's also becoming increasingly difficult to do.
I smell an Electron app on the horizon.
It is not an Electron application. It's written in C and uses GTK. So it's and all of the Snap support is provided through snapd glib. And that will come as no surprise when you see who the lead developer is, which is Robert Ansel. And his previous hits include LightDM and Simple Scan. So if you're familiar with those projects.
Ah.
Yeah. So Robert's been on the desktop team for many years. This news was broken by Phoronix, who are obviously keeping a close eye on source code repositories owned by Ubuntu.
Yes. I noticed their source is there's a GitHub repository for this.
Yes, there is a GitHub repository for this. And I think the project at this point is maybe 10 days old or something like that.
Right.
So early days, but I've already had a play with it and it's shaping up really nicely. And I think we'll be able to land this in 1910, but it's definitely going to be included in 2004.
Right. So that means that existing releases will continue to use GNOME software, and then from now on, or from whichever release it lands in on, this will be the way of installing snaps.
Right. So GNOME software, so GNOME software is installed by default, and that's a deb. And we do have a Snap Store Snap as well.
But how do you install it?
You snap install Snap Store. And that's based on, GNOME software and just the Snap plugin backend, because all it does is the Snap Store. And this new project will, eventually just go into that store name and, supersede what we were already publishing via the Snap there.
I think I installed my first Snap today.
Did you really? Which one did you go for?
Mumble.
Of course you did.
I installed it from the terminal.
Yeah, well, yes, that's always the option, of course, and many people do. But it's surprising how many people use the desktop store. Sometimes we get asked why bother, and it's very, very popular. People, when we do campaigns and we promote things in the store, the number of installs skyrocket. So we know people, use the store regularly. Anyway, so what else have you found in the news this week, Laura?
So Launchpad are hiring the team. They're looking for a new engineer who can write Python, mainly.
I didn't realise that Launchpad was still being engineered.
So I wasn't going to say that, but yes, me too. So apparently Ubuntu's hosted in Launchpad still.
It is, yeah.
But then it looks like Ubuntu also use GitHub for other things, like the Snap Store.
Yeah, it's one of these interesting things where, on the face of it, people think that Launchpad is just a source code repository, which is one of its, facilities. But, it actually controls a massive farm of build servers, and it knows how to stitch a whole distribution together and produce ISO images. And, it can host source control from different projects, and it's a CI system.
So it's quite an important thing to keep well maintained then.
Yeah. So, people don't realise that it's quite an important bit of infrastructure. And yeah, Colin Watson is currently leading all the efforts around Launchpad, and he posted a tweet about this. So if you're into Python or Zope or Flask and you know what any of those words mean, then maybe you want to apply, and there'll be a link in the show notes. And then also hiring are the Ubuntu desktop team.
Ah.
Wow.
So, yeah. So Ian Lane posted on the GNOME blog to announce, which seems appropriate, to announce that, they're looking for another engineer to join the desktop team. So if any of these words mean anything to you, GNOME and GTK and Network Manager and BlueZ, Pulse Audio, Xorg and Wayland, if you know what those things are and you know how to develop in those languages and alongside those technologies, then you may well be interested in applying for that position. Again, we'll have a link in the show notes. Benefits include being able to work from home in your pajamas, just like I used to do.
And gallivanting around.
What do you do now?
Well, no, I shh.
That's fair.
And yes, gallivanting around. Yeah, both of these blog posts is very interesting. Mention there's travel, and then they say, recent destinations that we've been to are Cape Town, Budapest, Berlin, Taipei, Montreal, Malta and Brussels. So
if one thing that guarantees, it won't be any of those places you get to go to next.
No, I think the next ones are Toronto, Paris, Vancouver and Cape Town. So that's the next 4 that I'm aware of.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. Right, that concludes the community news, but we've got a couple of events. Mark, what's the first event?
UbuCon Europe. It's happening from the 10th to the 13th of October in Sintra, Portugal.
I think their call for papers has closed now, so it's time to start thinking about your travel and accommodation. And they've recently put up a number of hotels in the area where you could stay. And Laura, we've got another event.
We do. We have Oggcamp 19, which is on the 19th to 20th of October this October. And it's in Manchester this time.
Fantastic. Are you both going?
Yes.
You are going? Oh, fantastic.
You're talking, aren't you?
Yes.
That'll be fun.
I'm not going, unfortunately.
Oh, just when I thought we were going to get the band back together.
I know. Yeah, I decided that it's probably not the smartest idea to be, 4 hours away from home a month before baby due.
Yeah.
In fact, 2 weeks before.
I was due to go to the Isle of Wight festival the year that Agatha was born, and it was similar. It was like 10 days before her due date, and I was thinking, I really want to see Juliette Lewis and the Licks, and I really should be at home for the birth of my daughter. I really want to go and see Juliette Lewis and the Licks. And, common sense weighed out in the end, and I never did get to see Juliette Lewis and the Licks.
I think I saw them a few years ago.
Did you really?
Yeah, if it's who I'm thinking of. Anyway.
I think Davey didn't come to an Oggcamp because his baby was due around Oggcamp time.
Oh, there we go, Mark. Upholding a well-held tradition. Right, enough Oggcamp talk and talk of new babies. That's the end of the community news and events. And now it's time for some news picks from around the tech world. I don't know if any of you noticed, but there's a new Raspberry Pi on the block.
Ooh.
Did you see this story?
I did.
Yes.
It's very shiny.
Yeah? Have you ordered one yet?
No, I haven't worked out what I might need it for yet.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. Surely you buy one and then you work out what you need it for.
I don't like putting stuff in drawers.
Yeah. It makes me feel bad.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did buy one. So the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B is quite a significant upgrade over its predecessors. So it's got a new SoC, and it's faster. It's got proper gigabit Ethernet now, and it's even got USB-C and dual monitor support and USB-C charging. I mean, it sounds like a modern device by comparison to the earlier models.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It seems like they're actually marketing this not as a teaching and learning device or something for makers. They're actually marketing this as a desktop. Like all of the pictures of it show it plugged into two monitors and being used as a workstation.
And I think one of the reasons that this is going to be more viable than people that were hoping to use previous models as desktops is there's now 3 price points and 3 different memory configurations available. So the base model is the usual $35 starting price with 1 gig of RAM, and then for $45 you can get one with 2 gigabytes, and for $55 you can get one with 4 gigabytes of RAM. And what I like about that, size increase in RAM and cost increase is that Apple could learn a thing or two about, the sliding scale of cost of their devices, I think.
Is there no £1,000 stand for the Raspberry Pi 4?
You know what? I bet somewhere on the internet somebody is making, $1,000 case for the Raspberry Pi 4.
All blinged up.
So did anyone have any end-of-year predictions about the Raspberry Pi 4?
I thought one of yours was about the Raspberry Pi. I remember I specifically said that it was going to have USB-C, so I was right. Okay.
I don't think I had any Raspberry Pi predictions, so maybe it was Alan. Okay, let's go and delete those notes out of the show note catalogue so that that'll all be forgotten by Christmas when we review this.
But yeah, one really nice thing about the new Raspberry Pi is they've changed the configuration of the Ethernet port now so that it's not going through the USB controller, which means it's actually full gigabit Ethernet now. Yeah,
which I think the monitor, the new displays that it can drive, it can support up to 8K, or is it 4K? 2 4K screens?
2 4K monitors, yeah.
Yeah, well, if you're really seriously going to be pushing that amount of data, then genuine gigabit Ethernet is going to be a requirement for that.
So what was it before? What were the limitations before?
The the Ethernet's port was on a USB 2 bus. So although technically, at a wire level, it was gigabit, you simply couldn't push that amount of data across the bus. So it was about half, I think theoretical limit was about half a gigabit, but in real world, use cases, it was even less than that. And that was only in the more recent models. But, this feels like the Raspberry Pi I've always wanted. I don't see much here not to like. So I do have one. It's sat next to me right now, but it's still in the box. I've been really starved of time this week. I'm desperate to get it out and have a play with it.
Get Ubuntu Mate running on it, no doubt.
Yes, you would be surprised at how many requests there have been for that in the last week. So yes, listeners, if you are keen on having Ubuntu Mate running on this thing, one day it will happen. I just need to find some time to work on it. So Laura, what did you find in the news?
Linux is now officially more popular than Windows on Azure.
Really?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure officially is quite the right term, but it has been said by a Microsoft employee who was talking about Linux security and stuff that it has surpassed Windows on Azure, which is quite cool.
Yeah, apparently in 2017, Microsoft revealed that 40% of Azure virtual machines were Linux-based. And then in 2018, about half of Azure VMs are Linux. That was both from Microsoft. So it was getting there officially.
Yeah, it's sort of just a extrapolation of the previous trend, and now it sounds like it's there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm surprised or not.
No, I kind of felt like that because, I mean, if you look on the Azure Marketplace, a lot of the stuff there is Linux-based and open source because there's no additional licensing involved. I mean, there are a lot of things, a lot of their, like if you get, for example, the PostgreSQL database service from Azure, it's running on a Windows VM underneath, but you don't see any of that. So it's possible that a lot of the stuff that is actually Windows is hidden, and the stuff where you say, I want that particular thing is Linux.
So is that like software as services? You mean you request a Postgres service?
Yeah, exactly. You say give me a Postgres service, and it gives you a database endpoint, but in the background it's running Postgres on Windows.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose it's great news. Somewhat unsurprising. I imagine it was always inevitable that was going to happen. Mark?
Well, in more Microsoft news, Microsoft stopped selling books through the Microsoft Store in April, but they've now announced that at the end of July, previously purchased ebooks will stop working.
Less awesome.
Oh dear.
So these ebooks were DRM encumbered, which meant that they had to, authenticate with some back-end Microsoft service to allow you to read them. And now they're turning all that off, which means that your books are going to stop working, which is a very strange sentence to say.
Okay.
I didn't actually know that Microsoft had been selling ebooks.
It's a fair point.
This might be part of the story. But why did they have a specific device?
I think there was something that ran through the Edge browser. I don't know if it was like a web app or if it was some DRM module built into Edge that it used.
So if you used it on the Surface, maybe?
Yes, I guess it worked with the sort of mobile devices as well. Yeah.
I can see this story being held up as an example, by people who are saying, the problem with, streaming services or subscription services is you don't own the content and one day it could be taken away. And here we are. Are people that have invested in books on this store going to be compensated at all?
Yes, apparently they're going to be refunded the purchase price, but they're going to be refunded the purchase price in Microsoft Store credits.
Oh, crikey.
So if they want to go rebuy the book somewhere else, they're out of luck. And if they've made notes or annotations on the ebooks, they get an extra $25 to compensate them for their loss.
Oh, wow. So everyone's going to annotate their books then between now and July. And if you didn't pick up on that, there's a pro tip for you to pocket 25 quid come July if you have bought a book from the Microsoft Store. Right. Well, we're running out of time, so we can't go into the last story in great detail. I'm sure if Alan was here, he'd be delighted to tell us all that FreeDOS is now 25 years old. So congratulations, FreeDOS, and long may you continue. And that wraps up the news headlines.
Did you know you can come and chat with us and other listeners in between shows? Come and join us in our Telegram group at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram.
And that's all for episode 13. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week when we'll be discussing running challenges. I have no idea what that is, so I'm looking forward to finding out. We'll also be going over your feedback, and I believe someone has found some command line love.
I have.
If you'd like to keep up with the show in the meantime, you could go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ubuntu podcast. And we'd also like to say thanks to bitfolk.com for providing our VPS that has been powering our podcast for 12 years. See you all next time.
Bye.